Derek said it the way some people say grace before dinner. Like it had always been there. Like it was sacred. "You don't get to tell me anything," he said. "You're not my real dad." It was a Thursday, early November, the kind of cold that settles in your joints and stays long after the fire dies. I was standing at the kitchen counter, slicing sweet potatoes into coins. The dull thud of the knife, the clock ticking above the fridge, the television humming low in the living room. Everything else went silent when he said it. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. He wanted it to land like a stone through a window. It did. I didn't respond. Not with words. Not with a sigh or a look. I placed the knife down, wiped my hands on the dish towel Maggie had embroidered with our initials. S+M, sewn with naive hope, and left the kitchen. I walked past Maggie, who sat curled up on the couch under a blanket she didn't knit. Her eyes flicked up from her book, but she said nothing. Not then. Not after. That silence would say more than Derek's words ever could. I climbed the stairs, stepped into the small office tucked into the corner of our house. A space I built myself when Maggie said she wanted just a little more room. It smelled like old paper and cedar. My world. My only room. The one place in the house that didn't speak back. I sat down, opened my laptop, and started digging. 7 years. That's how long I've been in this house. 7 years of groceries, soccer fees, dentist bills, lost backpacks, cracked screens, and birthday gifts ordered weeks in advance. 7 years of being the invisible scaffolding that held up a family that never quite looked me in the eye. I pulled up every receipt I had digital, scanned, saved out of a sense of duty I now understand as desperation. A man documents his sacrifices when he knows no one else will. $1,200 for Derek's braces. $80 per month for his phone line. $2,500 for Kaylee's dance camp last summer. $1,100 for new tires on the SUV I never drive but always service. $349 for the sneakers Nick promised Derek but never sent. And rent. God, the rent. Maggie had a good job once, before the company downsized and left her with freelance work that pays in maybe next month. I never asked her to explain the gaps. I just filled them. I printed everything. 36 pages of silent support. I stapled them in clean stacks. Then I wrote a cover letter. Nothing poetic. Just a note. Since you want to be the only real parent, I assume you'll want the bills too. And I sent it. To Nick. To the ghost in our family photos. The man who shows up in fresh Jordans and disappears before the cake is cut. Then I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall. At the photo Maggie insisted we frame. The four of us on the beach, me holding the camera. Maggie's hand on my arm. The kids squinting in the sun. A picture of balance. But that's all it was. Picture. Because this house had never been balanced. Not really. Nick wasn't just a man Maggie used to love. He was a presence in our lives. A silent god the kids prayed to when they wanted to rebel. He was fun. He was chaos. He was myth. He gave them video games and half-baked promises. And when he didn't follow through, they blamed the weather. They blamed Maggie. They blamed me. I remember once, when Derek was 13, he wanted to go to a concert in the city. Tickets were expensive. I said no. He threw his plate across the room. Maggie pulled me aside later and whispered, "He's just going through something." But I was going through something too. I was working 60-hour weeks, paying off debts that weren't mine, replacing a man who had never left in their hearts, only in a dress. And still I showed up. Every game, every recital, every morning before school. I packed lunches and paid parking tickets. I sat through late-night fevers and early morning tantrums. And the entire time I kept telling myself, eventually they'll see you. Eventually, love will break through the blood. But blood doesn't let go easy, especially when someone keeps tugging at it from the outside. Nick whispered things. I know this because Kaylee once repeated one by accident. Dad says you're just pretending. I asked her what she meant. She shrugged, said you're playing house, that you're not really anything. Not really anything. That's what I was. Not a father. Not a stepfather. Just a shadow pretending to be a shape. I didn't confront Nick. I never have. I let the courts decide custody and let Maggie manage the communication. I thought being the better man meant biting my tongue. But Derek's words, "You're not my real dad," they weren't just about authority. They were a verdict. A confirmation that I had spent nearly a decade building a life on borrowed ground. And the lease had just expired. After I sent the documents, I went back downstairs. Derek was still at the table, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. Kaylee was rinsing dishes. Maggie sat on the couch, unmoved. She looked up when I entered. I waited for her to say something. She didn't. That was worse than Derek's words. Because silence from your wife after your stepson draws a line in the sand? That's betrayal with a smile. I slept in the guest room that night. The one we used to call the game room, before the kids lost interest in family nights. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting cracks I hadn't noticed before. And I remembered something Derek said years ago. He was maybe 10. I had just fixed his bike for the third time that summer. He looked up at me and asked, "Are you gonna leave like my real dad?" I laughed then, ruffled his hair. "No, kid. I'm not going anywhere." I meant it. I still do. But here's the thing no one tells you about staying. It only means something if they want you there. I didn't rage. I didn't storm out or threaten or scream. I did something worse. I stopped pretending. The next morning, I got up before anyone else. The house was still. Derek's shoes were by the front door, caked in dried mud. Kaylee's school bag half-zipped on the stairs, notebooks spilling out. Maggie's cardigan thrown across the back of the couch. It was all still mine to clean, to fold, to fix. But not anymore. I poured a cup of coffee, black, no sugar. Sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop again. I started with the easy numbers. Rent, utilities, groceries. I listed every month since the day I moved in. 7 years, 9 months, and 4 days. I broke it down by category. I itemized every cost like I was preparing an audit. Because I was, for myself, for the version of me that needed to finally see the truth in numbers. Then I moved on to the extras. Private soccer league fees, $2,600 over 4 seasons. Summer robotics camp for Derek, $1,850. Dance costumes, recital tickets, travel, $3,400 across 5 years. 3 separate laptops. 2 replaced after being accidentally broken. 6 iPhones between them. All mine. Every upgrade. Every cracked screen repair. I dug deeper. School pictures. School supplies. Medical bills. Prescription refills. Birthday parties with bounce houses, rented entertainers, and goodie bags that cost more than my own childhood Christmases. Then the emergency costs. The last-minute requests. The texts at work from Maggie. "Can you transfer $300? Derek's field trip is due today and I forgot." Or, "Kaylee needs new cleats by tomorrow. Her old ones don't fit." I always sent the money. Always. Even when it meant skipping my own lunch. Even when I had to move around bills to cover it. I put it all into a spreadsheet. Color-coded. With columns. Date, expense, description, beneficiary, and amount. By the time I finished, it was 5:42 p.m. The total, $137,682.77. Not including groceries. Not including the time. Not including the kind of exhaustion that settles in your spine and never leaves. That night, Maggie knocked on the guest room door. She stood there in her robe, arms crossed. "We're not really going to do this, are we?" I looked at her, tired, hollow. I didn't even have the strength to ask what this meant. She went on. "Derek didn't mean it. He's a teenager. You know how they get." I didn't respond. Not with words. I turned the laptop toward her. The spreadsheet open. The total glowing like a red flare. She didn't move. "This is what I've paid," I said quietly. "This is what he's dismissed." Maggie blinked. "Steve, he's hurting. Nick keeps feeding him things. He's confused." "No," I said. "He's not confused. He's convinced. There's a difference." She looked down, then away. She didn't ask about the spreadsheet. She didn't touch it. She walked back down the hall and closed the door behind her. I worked with a lawyer the next morning. Nothing aggressive. Nothing that would hurt the kids. Just clear legal boundaries. A formal letter of cost reallocation. A request for Nick to assume all non-essential financial responsibilities for his biological children, extracurriculars, electronics, entertainment, transportation. I was still willing to cover necessities. A roof, meals, heat. But the rest, the luxuries, those belong to the real dad now. We mailed it certified. I emailed it too. I left no room for ignorance. And then I made appointments. I called Kaylee's dance studio and dropped our sponsorship. Called Derek's club coach and let him know the fees were now under Nick's name. Cancelled their streaming subscriptions, cloud storage accounts, Spotify family plans. I closed every little tap I'd left running for years. And then I waited. The sit-down came 3 days later. Maggie insisted on neutral ground. So we met at a quiet diner, the kind with leather booths that smell like syrup and thyme. I sat in the corner booth. Maggie next to me. Across the table, Nick, with his smug grin and mirrored sunglasses tucked into his collar. Derek and Kaylee flanked him. Derek smirked like he was finally winning something. Kaylee looked down at her phone, already detached. I said nothing at first. I placed 3 items on the table. A manila folder with the spreadsheet and receipts. A breakdown of projected monthly costs. A formal letter drafted by the lawyer. Nick picked up the top sheet with 2 fingers, like it was dirty. "What is this?" Maggie answered before I could. "It's everything Steve's covered over the years. Every cent." Nick chuckled. "Jesus, what is this, a bill?" "No," I said. "It's accountability." He flipped through a few pages, growing quieter. Derek leaned forward. "What's going on?" I looked at him, my voice steady. "Your dad wants to be the one in charge. He said I don't have a say, so I'm making it official. He's now the one who covers the costs. Anything beyond what's legally required, it's his to handle." Derek's face darkened. "So you're just backing out?" "I'm stepping back," I said, "because I'm not welcome in. And I don't fund what I'm not allowed to influence." Nick slapped the folder shut. "This is extortion." "No," Maggie said quietly. "This is the tab you've been ignoring." Nick scoffed. "You've got money, Steve. Don't act like this is about principle." "It's not about money," I said. "It's about being told I'm not part of this family, and finally believing it." Kaylee looked up. "Does this mean I can't go to dance anymore?" I turned to her gently. "You can go, if your dad pays for it." Her mouth trembled, just a little. Nick leaned back. "This is a low blow." I shrugged. "You said I'm nothing, so now I cost nothing." The waitress came over, asking if we were ready to order. No one said a word. She walked away quietly. Derek was the first to speak again. "So what happens now?" I looked at him. "Now your biological father takes the lead. If you want to play, dance, stream, game, you ask him. Not me." He opened his mouth to argue, but I saw the hesitation, the flicker of doubt, of something deeper, fear. Not because he missed me, but because Nick was already checking the time on his phone. The house grew quiet in the days after. Not a peace, but a silence shaped like tension. Like the hush before a storm, or the pause before a scream. Everyone tiptoed around the new rules, pretending they weren't real. But they were. I canceled their phone lines the next morning. It was quick. 3 clicks in my account dashboard. Derek's line, Kaylee's line, gone. I left Maggie's active. She never argued when the bills were paid. Only when they weren't. Later that afternoon, Kaylee burst into the kitchen, eyes wide with panic. "My phone's not working." I looked up from the sink. "Talk to your father." She blinked, confused. "You?" "Your real father," I said. "He's the one responsible now. Remember?" She stood there a moment, mouth open, struggling to decide if this was a joke or a punishment. But it was neither. It was a mirror. She turned on her heel and stormed out. Later that night, Derek stood in the hallway with his Xbox controller in hand. "Did you cancel my subscription?" I nodded. Yes. He stared at me like I'd taken a limb. You said you wouldn't touch necessities. And I haven't, I said. You have food, a roof, heat, lights. A gaming subscription isn't a necessity. He scoffed. I use it to talk to my friends. Then I suggest you start talking to your father instead. He didn't respond, just muttered something under his breath and slammed his door hard enough to rattle the walls. And still Maggie said nothing. She moved like a ghost through the house, washed dishes, folded laundry, reheated leftovers I'd bought. But she never looked me in the eye. She never said thank you for what I still covered. Never said sorry for what I'd carried alone. She just kept pretending this wasn't happening. That silence could undo damage. But silence is just another form of consent. The days passed. The kids sulked. The house began to rot under the weight of absence. Not mine, but Nick's. Because it didn't take long for reality to catch up. Derek came home after a weekend at Nick's. His hair smelled like smoke. His face drawn. He didn't make eye contact. Just dropped his duffel at the door and walked into the kitchen. He forgot to buy groceries, he mumbled. We had ramen. 3 nights in a row. I didn't gloat, didn't smile. He opened the fridge, stared at it a long time. Do we still have milk? He asked. Yes, I said. As long as you treat me with respect, I'll always make sure there's milk. He didn't reply, just nodded and closed the door gently. The next day, Kaylee came home early. She was supposed to stay at Nick's until Monday morning. She looked different, smaller, shoulders hunched, eyes red. I didn't ask. She told me anyway. He forgot the recital. I set down my coffee. I texted him 3 times. He said he'd be there. But when I went backstage and looked out at the crowd, his seat was empty. She sniffed. And you weren't there either. I nodded. You told me I wasn't welcome. I believed you. She wiped her nose with her sleeve. He said if we pushed hard enough, you'd leave. That Mom would pick us over you. She sat down across from me, pulled her legs into the chair. But she didn't. And you didn't. You're still here. And he forgets everything. I didn't speak. I wanted to reach for her, but I didn't. Then she whispered, I don't want to go back next weekend. I nodded. That's your choice. Later, Maggie found me in the garage. I was fixing the sink in the laundry room. A leak no one else had noticed. Or maybe they had, but just waited for me to handle it. She leaned against the doorframe. They're confused, she said. They're not used to this. Used to what? I asked. Boundaries. I stood, wiped my hands. You mean consequences? She flinched. They're just kids. No, I said. They're kids who've learned to manipulate adults. And you let them. You let them believe they could treat me like a stranger and still eat at my table. Sleep under my roof. Use my money. She looked down. I didn't mean to. But you did. We stood in silence. Then she said it. Quietly. Almost too quiet. You're right. It was the first time in years those words had left her mouth. She turned and walked away. That night, Derek came into the kitchen after dinner. Maggie had already gone to bed. The dishes were drying in the rack. I was sitting at the table, reading the same page for the 3rd time. He cleared his throat. If I get a part-time job, can I still play next season? I didn't look up right away. Yes, I said. If you treat me with respect, I'll always show up for you. But I won't be a wallet without a voice. He nodded slowly. Okay. Then he added softer. I didn't think he'd really step up. I don't know what I thought. You thought he'd be the fun one forever. Yeah. We sat there for a moment. I missed the games, he said. I missed the respect, I replied. He nodded again, then walked upstairs. Later, I checked the spreadsheet again. Not to gloat, just to remind myself of the line I'd drawn. The boundary that had kept me sane. That had cracked their fairy tale and started something real. Not perfect, but real. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a tantrum. I didn't disappear. I just stopped funding my own erasure. There's a strange power in restraint, in drawing a line and not crossing it, even when you hear crying on the other side. You become something undeniable. Not angry, not cruel, just finished. Nick never responded to the documents. Never acknowledged the bills, the ledger, the letter. He did what he always did. He vanished behind silence, hoping someone else would clean up the mess. But I didn't, and neither did Maggie, because this time the consequences stayed. Kaylee stopped going to her dance studio. Quietly, she didn't ask again. She folded her leotards, tucked her slippers into the closet, and filled her afternoons with homework and silence. One night, I found her in the garage, sitting cross-legged beside my toolbox, watching me fix a broken stool. "You used to watch me dance," she said. "Every time. I didn't look up. You used to wave when I was on stage." Still, I didn't speak. Then, "I miss when things felt safe." I nodded. "You're still safe," I said. "But I'm not invisible anymore." Derek picked up a job at a pizza shop 3 blocks away. His first paycheck was smaller than he expected. He asked me how taxes worked. I showed him. We sat at the kitchen table for 45 minutes going over his withholdings, direct deposit forms, savings accounts. He said thank you, the first thank you in months. He still didn't call me Dad. That word is heavy. I don't expect it anymore. What I expect is eye contact. Respect. Pause before contempt. Maggie started cooking again. She hadn't really cooked since the fallout. For weeks, meals had come in microwave trays and quiet orders from food delivery apps. But now the stove steamed. The oven hummed. She tried a new pasta recipe one Sunday and asked what I thought. "It's good," I said. She didn't smile, but she nodded. She knew it wasn't just about the food. She stopped defending Nick, too. Stopped telling the kids he was trying or just busy. She let his absence hang in the room like sour air. And slowly, they began to see him for what he was. Derek came home from a visit and tossed his duffel on the floor. "He spent the whole time on the couch," he muttered. "Didn't even ask how school was." Later, I found that same duffel repacked, neatly, like he wasn't going back soon. Kaylee started texting Maggie during her weekends away, asking to come home early. Sometimes Maggie said yes. Sometimes she told her to stick it out, to see her father for what he truly was. I think that was harder for Maggie than anyone, because she had built that man up for years even after she stopped loving him. She thought the illusion would protect the kids. But illusions don't raise families. They just delay the truth. And the truth was this. Nick wanted all the credit, none of the cost. He wanted to be the hero without the hard parts, the father without the fatherhood. He fed them lies so he wouldn't have to feed them dinner. He whispered poison into their ears so he could disappear without guilt. And I let him, for too long. That was my mistake. Not trusting Maggie, not trusting the kids, but trusting that if I gave enough, they'd eventually see me. They didn't. Not until I disappeared financially. Not until the things they loved stopped appearing. Not until the car rides, the subscriptions, the recitals, the sneakers, the Sunday pizzas, all vanished. Then they noticed. Then they looked for me. That was never revenge. It was a mirror. And what they saw in that reflection was a man who had always been there, but who had finally stopped pretending he didn't bleed. We don't talk about what happened. Not directly. Not in one big, dramatic scene. Comes in glances. In the way Derek asks before borrowing the car now. In how Kaylee offers to do the dishes without being asked. In the way Maggie sets the table, 4 plates, not 3. Not 2. We exist in the same house. But something shifted. They still don't call me Dad. I don't expect them to. But when we drive past the city skyline, and Kaylee leans forward and says, "You don't have to pay for dinner. I've got birthday money." I feel it. When Derek calls out, "Hey, do you think I should email my coach about that game footage?" and waits for my answer, I feel it. When Maggie says, "They ask about you when you're not around," I feel it. We're not perfect, but we're real now. The fantasy broke, and what survived is something quieter, harder, truer. Nick still exists somewhere out there, still texting memes and making empty promises. But I don't speak his name anymore, and neither do the kids. They've learned to live in the world as it is, not the one he built for them in cheap words. And I've learned to live without needing to be loved like a father. Because I was one. Even when they didn't see it. Even when Maggie forgot it. Even when Nick tried to erase it. I showed up. I stayed. I paid. I built. I bled. And now, finally, they see the shape I left in their lives. Not out of fear, but out of absence. That's how mirrors work. They show you what you're missing when the light hits right. So now I ask you, was I wrong to stop being the bank when I was no longer allowed to be the foundation? Was I cruel to pull away when my love had been turned into currency? Or was that the only way to survive, to finally demand value for the years I gave away for free? You tell me, would you have stayed? Or would you have snapped too?